We can't do it on our own. We tried. Everything we tried to do didn't work. The way we know is 95% of, and everybody here knows it, 95% of diets have failed. We just all know that. Even that show on TV, the 600 Pounder, it's called, where they do give the stomach surgery, and they say right in the beginning 95%. Because the perception change. It needs to be the perception change we talk about on the meeting. And I'll bring right in here, talking about the clarity with the water. I always bring this up. When we change our thinking, changing to this alone and wanting God's gift of the clarity of water. Do you realize the amount of calories there are in the foods that we do eat? The drinks we have, we go to called lattes, or these drinks with 1,200 calories. Almost in one drink could be as many calories as we should be eating in one day. So when we try to resist all of these things and we say we shouldn't want it, it doesn't work. But we have the perception change. And the steps talks all about this higher power and God consciousness. A lot of times people say, I don't understand how it relates to the steps, all of this, the compulsive overeating and Overeaters Anonymous. How does an Overeaters Anonymous all relate to the steps? But that's the basic thing. In other addiction programs, it's all about the steps. And the reason I keep on saying that so many times is because a lot of times I go to Overeaters Anonymous meetings and all different types of meetings, and the problem is that they're not referring to the basic part of the program, the steps. And the steps have the answer. And step 1 says we're powerless. And that's why I started the meeting by saying that diets don't work. So we're going to talk about the solution, right? The solution to this problem in relation to the food. It's not when you pay thousands of dollars or when these billion-dollar corporations tell you what it's all about. They're telling you through self-will and self-control to control it. I did it for, a while, and you could do it. Like for a year, I lost the weight. But that day comes because what happens is we start to say, well, I lost the weight. It's okay, and I feel a little bit better, but what's the big deal? And then you go back to your addiction again. But when you have the perception change, like I said with the water, and also I have some fruit here, apple, orange, let me get that, and all of this stuff here, right? Same thing with this, the perception change. Do we want those foods that the corporations make with they have 50 ingredients in them, they have 3 times the calories. Also, my diet, if anybody wants to know, is that one ingredient, right? One ingredient. And that's what it is. So when the food, people always decide what type of diet should they be on: high carbohydrate, low carbohydrate, protein diet, all these different diets. The answer is that it's not the food so much as what they put on it. Or when you fry the foods, or when you go to these restaurants and it's all salt, oil, and sugar, they call it SOS. We talk about everything. I'll bring everything into the meeting. I'll bring about alcohol, drugs, whatever it is, and wanting people to like us, and we'll review all of that. And of course, it's all about the steps. But anyway, in Overeaters Anonymous, I'm going to just bring up a few things here. Actually, what I'll start reading is, there's a book called The 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. And when AA, we have the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. But it's an amazing book. It talks directly in relation to the food, and it talks directly about the problems and the steps and how we overcome it through the spiritual awakening. But let me just read the introduction so you have an idea, and then we'll just go further into different things. And it says here, in the introduction to this book, it says, I actually have the large print, right? So there you go. It comes in a smaller size if you want it. So, we of Overeaters Anonymous have found in this fellowship a way to recover from the disease of compulsive overeating. We use compulsive overeating and compulsive eating interchangeably. These include, but are not limited to, overeating, undereating, food addiction, anorexia, bulimia, binge eating, and overexercising, purging, and other compulsive food behaviors. No matter what form our disease takes, anyone having a problem with food can help in Overeaters Anonymous. After repeated failures to control our eating, our weight, we now have a solution that works. Our solution is a program recovery, a program of 12 simple steps. By following these steps, thousands of OA members have stopped eating compulsively. It's pretty amazing. In the literature, just like we have, also Overeaters Anonymous, of course, it's all about the big book and the steps. And in there, they do have the explanation. The steps explain how to get over our compulsive overeating. And a lot of the meetings I talk about, like diets don't work, trying to control it. Because everything, when you read this book and the steps, this is all about the steps in here, and they have great explanations about it. It's getting out of that change of thinking, the perception change in relation to the food. Basically, they have a definition in Overeaters Anonymous of abstinence: the act of refraining from compulsive overeating and compulsive food behaviors while working or maintaining a healthy body weight, recovery, removal of the need to engage in compulsive eating behaviors. And they also have what's called the dignity of choice. Now, in the dignity of choice and in the 12-step book, again, the dignity of choice talks about, I'll just read one or two sentences, and it also talks here about we have recovered from compulsive eating. Now, again, on the internet, you can get, it's called the dignity of choice. It has some food plans in it, and also it has this introductory stuff, which to me talks all about the spirituality, the program, the change, the design for living, and change of perception. Look, all these other diets, whether they're Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig's, whatever the type of diets, Nutrisystem, whatever it is, whatever they're called, they're all about the control. If I only control the food, if I can do it. Most people here in 12-step programs, and it doesn't work. And again, I just have to say, somebody could say, what are you talking about? But we know 95% of it doesn't work. But when we have that perception change, here's the whole deal. When through the spiritual awakening, when we want realizing our body is God's temple, then the perception starts to change. And we start to think and have the clarity. The clarity I showed you with the water, the clarity of wanting healthy things. And then we start to change physically, even our palate starts to change. And it's all related to the steps. I'll get into some of that anyway. So by the way, if you like what you hear here, press the like button or press the subscribe button, because YouTube ranks these videos according to how many people like or subscribe. If you want to get the message out there, if you like what you hear, tell the people, push the like and subscribe button. But first I wanted to show the basics here. They also have two books that I do have. I mean, there's a lot of others, but these are daily readings. And in the readings, they talk about what I'm talking about here. One is called The Voices of Recovery, and the other is For Today. The daily readings books for today, Voices Recovery. And if you read the excerpts in them each day, and it talks about that recovering. So, recovery, being recovered, as it says, being recovered from a hopeless state of body or mind. We have the change of thinking, obsession of mind, allergy to body, leads to a phenomenon of craving. I'm always, if you come to these meetings, I'm always doing everything through the big book and the steps and related into all of these addictions. A lot of times, we're talking with the Alcoholics Anonymous and all these other anonymous things and wanting people to like us and compulsive behaviors, but it all relates to one thing. And it talks about it in these readings here. Again, the reason I'm saying is that when you read the literature, go to that basic literature, read that book I told you, and This Dignity of Choice, and it talks about doing it through a spiritual process, a spiritual reckoning. Okay, so but when we started, even with in other 12-step programs, when it's more or less a group therapy. When you go to the meetings, they're in the problem, what's called the not the solution, trying to control it. And then I always talk like step one says we're powerless. How does that relate to the food? It has everything to do with it. So people ought to say they don't know. So a lot of times the work, the Overeat Anonymous program, and with the steps, the connection really isn't there. I didn't get it until somebody took me through the big book, through the steps, right? And then I also read the Overeat Anonymous 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. But it says here, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, but of course in Overeaters Anonymous, they changed it to food. So we're powerless over food, and our lives have become unmanageable, right? I love the second one, right? This is all related to food. We became to believe a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So what does that even mean, being restored to sanity? In our society, the big corporations, the advertising on TV, the internet, when you go down the highway, all of these things have created in our mind this insanity and thinking. What the whole thinking is we're making food a higher power. We're missing out on all of life. We're into what's called a material thing. It could be money, it could be success. In our case, it's the food. So listen closely, because this is the whole transition happens when we read these steps. And like I always say, you could have that transformation, that spiritual awakening, at least during this week after the meeting. Look at that nice glass of water, or a bottle of water, and savor it and understand that's the real life. This other stuff is stuff that the corporations controlled you with through the money and have you a slave. Just like we always talk about other addictions, but getting people to like us, we're a slave to our ego. The ego says, I know what to do. If I have a bigger plate of food, everything would be great. Everything would be fine. So so it's in the big book. It's also the OA 12, Overeaters Anonymous 12 and 12. And then talk about, the food plans are in that dignity of choice and the diet. And again, people always announce themselves as compulsive overeaters, food addicts, sugar addicts, right? Sugar addict, right? There we go. Sugar addict. And all the synthetic stuff they put in the sweeteners they put in the food. It's crazy. And then you'll hear a lot of OA speakers talk about this. And I mentioned For Today, dignity of choice. Voices of Recovery, that's another 12 and 12, a daily reader. So anyway, what I wanted to do was, what I'm going to go into here is, we want to get that, again, always at these meetings, we try to get that awakening, that spiritual awakening. First of all, we have to understand the problem. So step 1 and step 2, when I did the steps and I realized in my life, my thinking, I needed transformation in thinking. My thinking was the whole problem. So in relation to food, some people constricting, obsessive compulsive, or whatever you do, anorexia, bulimia, whatever it is, or compulsive overeating, or being sugar addicts, food addicts, whatever it is, we have the solution here. I always say it's a simple, simple program. It's a simple, simple program. So when we read the steps, it says step 1 again, we admitted we're powerless, and step 3 says made a decision to turn our will over to the care of God. So what we do is, we get that spiritual nourishment. And a lot of times I'll even read quotes from the Bible, other philosophical Eastern Western thinking. So you got to understand, why do a lot of people in religions and philosophies fast? Because they realize it's a thing of the flesh. Now, did anybody hear of gluttony, right? The 7 deadly sins, right? Actually, in the 12 and 12 in AA in page 48, Bill writes about the 7 deadly sins. Gluttony being one of them. Lust, envy, pride. All of these things are related to everything in our life, and the food and the addictions related to everything else. It's all related. And the way to get it out, the answer is, I always say my diet program are these 12 steps. Again, a lot of people sitting here say, well, what's the connection? Don't I have to understand? Look, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a plan of eating, something like, there's something called the gray sheet and all of these different plans that you could have. And in that Dignity of Choice, they talk about a lot of different plans of eating. I'm not saying because that comes from intuitively God or higher power or higher conscience will let us know how to proceed. But we make it about trying to control our food, even our emotions, our anger, resentment. We become friends with it and we understand it. So when we have these compulsions, when we have this higher consciousness, we'll know intuitively how to handle it. And I'm going to read the 10-step promises, which is going to describe all of this. So the steps, the program, learning, God's nourishment, our body's God's temple, all of these things, that transformation. Can you imagine, people go on diets like I did for a year and I lost all the weight, then I gained it all back. But I said 95% of the time it fails. There are 5% of people who stay on it, right? And they're miserable. So we say, and when I was in AA, we said, you're so miserable when you came in here, you don't want to work this program, the spiritual angle, you don't want to work the steps, you might as well go out and drink, right? So that's the way we feel when we're miserable, discontent, and irritable. We say we might as well get back into our addiction. So the nourishment, some people think that the sunlight or the breath, or these are nourishment, right? This is nourishment, right? They get it from the energy of the sun, whatever it is. So we don't need our nourishment from this materialistic thing called food all day, what we do, we eat 1 meal a day all day long, right? That's making it our higher power. But by doing that, we become very finite. We come home, we close the shades, we sit there and eat. Look, I had the same with the addictions in other addictive programs. In Alcoholics Anonymous, my best friend was the alcohol. So then it became the food. What could be better? That was the solution. Food was actually the solution to all my problems. We needed that perception change, a new design for living. It's like called actually, and this, what's great about this in 12-step program, if you've been in other 12-step programs, I work a lot of people who were in Narcotics Anonymous. They were on heavy drugs, not only the alcohol, but on cocaine, heroin, whatever it was. And they said this is called the final frontier. This brings us, but what's great about it, bring you really close to the steps. When you get that spiritual awakening, when you want to be your body's God's temple, and you have that change in design for living, that change of thinking, then your life will change, and you won't even have to fight it anymore.